Today is December 20th. It is the fourth Sunday in Advent. And of course, we know the solstice is right around the corner and Christmas Eve coming up so soon. I want to talk today about cultivating light and about the principle of peace as it relates to the light that we cultivate and the journey that we make towards this thing in consciousness that really is Christmas, right? Now, I have to begin with sort of a confession, which is that I flipped the last 2 weeks of Advent, not intentionally, but just in the order of things. And joy, for most people celebrating Advent in the traditional sense, today would be the Sunday of joy, and last week would have been the Sunday of peace. Sometimes when you do an Advent wreath, the third Sunday, the candle is a different color. It's pink, the other ones are purple, and that's the peace candle, and that's lit on the third Sunday. Well, I fumbled that in my outline this year. And what was interesting was none of you called me on it. So I didn't get a single email from somebody saying, hey, this is not the order of Advent that I remember. But, you know, we're New Thought. We're non-traditional. We do things our own way. So today we're going to do peace. And I think it's a sort of a divine mistake, if you will, a divine order, a reordering of things, because I think it's really important to focus on this concept of peace coming into Christmas Eve, particularly this year, to examine really what that means, right? I mean, there are over 300,000 families that will have an empty chair at Christmas this year, right? Over 300,000 deaths from COVID. Another, if the pace continues, another 3,000 today. In one day, more deaths than we experienced in the terror attack of 9/11. And in this last week, in the last 7 days, there have been more COVID-related deaths than the deadliest year of the Vietnam War, 1968. And millions of lives that have been disrupted. And so while there is hope around the corner and there is light on the horizon for our new year, we have a way to go, and we have still work to do in consciousness and in the real physical realm, right? So I want to bring those things to our attention today as we talk about what it means to cultivate light, what it means to cultivate peace in our times. We are also in the middle of a political shift, right? One that the majority of Americans felt was necessary and demonstrated with their vote. And yet at the same time, we have a fraction of people and even office holders in the current administration that remain resistant to that idea, if not obstinate, to the inevitable reality and the pending reality of this peaceful exchange of democracy. And it's tempting maybe for you and I to kind of not give that a lot of attention, right? Because the inevitable is the inevitable and it is going to happen. Yet the truth remains that there is a level of obstruction that is more than just a difference of opinion, right? It's actually a real troublesome and consequential level of obstruction that is standing in the way of the orderly flow of democracy. And I mention all of these things not to trigger anybody watching or to cause more trouble than is necessary, but I bring these things in to say that this world that we find ourselves in is actually maybe not so different than the one that Jesus was born into. Or let me say it more accurately than that. The one in which the not so different from the world in which the stories about Jesus's birth were written into, right? Did you catch that? There's a difference, maybe a little bit, right? Decades, some 80, 90 years between the world in which Jesus was actually born into and the world in which the narratives of his birth were written into. The context there is the context of the world in which Luke is living in, the world in which Matthew is living in. And so 70, 80, 90 AD, in which they are saying to a group of people, I want to tell you this story about this individual and what it means. And so we find ourselves, like Luke did, today, standing between two worlds. It's been my theme for this season of Advent, between two worlds. We find ourselves standing between the world that is calling us, the world that is beckoning us, the world that is inevitable, right? The dawn of light, and the world that is shaping us, the world that is forming us now, the world that continues to impound its impression upon our everyday experience. And we have to find a way to straddle and to journey between those two worlds, right? This is the context that Luke found himself in. And it's not surprising then that the stories are, the narratives are filled with messages of hope, messages of peace, messages of a light that would come into the world and transform the world, right? An illumination that would make all things seen, right? You begin to hear these not triggers, but these codes, right? A light that would illuminate the world and make all things seen. That's social and political code for an audience that is struggling with what the current reality is. Right. And so whatever way that you can relate to that, I would invite you to do so, because it really changes the impactfulness of these birth narratives and this thing we call the Christmas story. And it begs the question then, how do we cultivate light in these times? How do we cultivate peace? It's hard to know sometimes how to do that, if we're honest, right? It's hard to make sense of things that are going on that we can't comprehend. I can't comprehend the death rate of COVID and many of the structural, administrative, federal response things that are related to that death rate being what it is, right? It's hard to comprehend and make sense of that. It's hard to know what to do with that anxiety or that concern. And in fact, we try to convince ourselves when we're inundated with so much trouble, with so much angst, with so much uncertainty, it's not uncommon for the human mind to convince itself that actually cultivating light and peace is much easier than we think. It's not uncommon that we will think of peace as something that will come when the fighting has stopped, right? When the resisting has ended, when the engagement in conflict ceases, right? When the tension relieves itself, right? And so it's tempting to think that we cultivate peace by not engaging in the conflict, not engaging, not participating in the tension, turning away from and not provoking it, right? I think we would all agree that we've certainly had enough. I know I have. There's this sense of, well, I've had enough of this fighting and arguing and being contentious with people who think differently than me, or with what I see on the TV, or what's happening in the world. And can't we all just have some peace, right? Can we just have some peace and quiet? Yeah. And so there is where the call for peace begins. It is a call for the end of tension. It's the beginning of the invitation, but it's not the full picture of what peace is. I want to hang here for just a minute and invite you to lean into these thoughts and these ideas. Is the end of tension, is that what the gospel writers intended when they spoke of the Prince of Peace, when they spoke of a light that would illumine the world, when they spoke of a kingdom to reign forever and ever? Were they speaking of an end of all tension? Is that the peace that we think of when we in New Thought sing, "Let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me"? Are we hoping and praying that it is as simple as just thinking peaceful thoughts, being a part of what I call the love and light brigade and sending peaceful energy around the world? I'm not so sure that that is the totality of what peace means. In fact, I'm actually quite convinced that it's not. Not to say that those things are not part of it, right? Breathing, meditating, cultivating a sense of inner peace and allowing that to go forth from us. Oh, that is a spiritual practice for sure. And leading from a place of non-contentious energy and peaceful energy. Oh, that is definitely a part of the deep spiritual practice of what it is to walk in this world as a mystic and one who has an awareness of the allness of God. Don't get me wrong. But I wonder if sometimes we mistake peace for apathy. Oh, ooh. I wonder if we mistake a peace for non-confrontation. I wonder if we mistake peace for lack of tension. Maybe a release of tension would be okay, but a lack of tension, if there was a lack of tension on our bodies right now, we would all explode, right? Or we'd actually cave in because the pressures of gravity on us is met and matched by the pressure of our blood pressure, right? Pushing the feeling that you feel when you touch yourself or someone is the pressure of the inside pressure pushing out and the outside pressure pushing in, and they match each other. That keeps your body together. Come on, somebody, right? If we had a lack of tension, then you would either explode or implode, depending on where the lack of tension was, right? If we had a lack of tension in our muscles, then our muscles would collapse in atrophy from a lack of growth. If we had a lack of tension in our minds would degrade from a lack of mental rigor. There is a certain amount of tension that is required to keep us engaged, awake, alert, active, physical, vital, alive in this dimension. Martin Luther King said that true peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. Ooh, that's good. True peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice, right? And so I have come to believe that a call for the end of tension is the beginning of the invitation to cultivate light. Whew. I want you to hear that. I want you to hear that. The call to end tension is the beginning of the invitation to cultivate more light. And light is not the kind of just warm, fuzzy love and light, right? But to cultivate light is to say that I'm going to cultivate an inner awareness of my strength, of my wholeness, of my oneness with God, of however you want to call it, but the anchoring in of this is who I am. And the cultivation of light means to shine that light And to shine that light is to illuminate the places that are dark. Oh, I don't know if you can catch what I'm get what I'm downloading here, but the call to the end of tension is the invitation to cultivate light. Cultivating light means shining into the darkness. In other words, the places and the sources of where the tension began. Woo! Come on, somebody. Oh, you see, a lack of of tension is that invitation to wake up and say, let me shine some light. Now think about the gospel stories there. A light that shone all around them. A light that illuminate. The angels appeared in the night sky, and the light shone all around them. What does that mean? It means there was no place to hide. It means that everything was revealed. It means that there were no shadows. Oh, if you can catch what is being said there, not just physically, but metaphysically, consciously, about what happens in our lives when we dare to cultivate a light and bring it into the dark place. Oof. There is a scripture from Isaiah that is often used in connection with this week of peace and Advent. And as I said, it's usually spoken a week earlier, but that's okay. We're going to use it today. It's Isaiah 40. And it says, "Comfort, oh comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that she has served her term, that her penalty is paid, and that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins." It goes on to talk about this voice crying out. Uh, and I just invite you to just allow that to hang in the background of your mind for a moment. Let me say it again. Comfort, oh, comfort my people, says God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that she has served her term, that her penalty is paid, and that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all of her sin. We will speak to what that is in just a moment. The presence and the cultivation of peace is from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, it's not just peace, it's the presence of justice. It's not just the absence of tension, but it's also the presence of justice. Peace is not just the absence of conflict, it's the presence of justice. You see, here it is. Let me say it this way, see if you can catch it. The kind of peace that gets announced by choirs of angels is a messy peace. Right? The kind of peace that gets announced by choirs of angels is a messy and conflicted peace because it comes with the illumination of light that says there's no place to hide. There are no shadows anymore. Everything is illuminated. In other words, all of the aspects of your consciousness and your conscious or unconscious contribution to the world and to the shadows that are playing in the world, that all of those contributions get illuminated. And we get to see what's really going on. We get to see how our consciousness is playing into the dark and the fear and the injustice and the disenfranchisement and the othering that is taking place in the world. Because we know, you and I know, that consciousness is all that there is. And if consciousness is all that there is and we're willing to cultivate our light, then where are we going to shine that light? The only place we can shine it, which is in our consciousness. And if the peace that comes, that is announced by the choirs of angels, is accompanied by a light that illuminates everything, then it means there's nothing left unturned in our consciousness. We get to see our contribution, consciously or unconsciously, to the way things are in the world. And the illumination means that we suddenly have the insight and the wherewithal to make new choices, to bring peace to earth. This messy kind of peace that comes with the choir of angels means that there is a weighing into, not an avoidance of, but a weighing into division, to demand a reckoning for every way in which we have diverged from the requirement of love. cultivating light and bringing peace into the world is not a avoidance of division. It's a weighing into the division and demanding a reckoning for every way in which you and I have diverged from the requirement of love, because love is all that there is, you see. The peace that passes understanding does not lead to many silent nights, because everything's got to be disrupted in the night. But it is the only way to that new and glorious morn. And that cry that is in that scripture from Isaiah, the cry changes when we understand what our role is in it. The cry changes from a desire for someone outside of us to come in to fix it. When we understand that our consciousness is contributing to a world that works or doesn't work, whatever the world condition is in this moment, then the cry becomes about our inner knowing that change is coming. Oh, let Jerusalem know, the scripture says, let Jerusalem know, right? That she served her term. Jerusalem is our center of the center of the city, the center of our being, metaphysically. Let Jerusalem know. Let the heart of you know that you have served your term, that you have suffered and struggled, you have been at the effect of a world that works or doesn't work by the result of everyone else's conscious contribution or unconscious contribution to that world. You have suffered enough, and now peace will come. Peace will become because your consciousness will be illumined into what your role has been and what your role can be in bringing a new light. In other words, a spark and a light is lit, and it cannot be put out, because you, in your awakening, are willing to shine it, you see. And once you awaken to that truth, you cannot stop it. It is the inevitable. The light of justice must come. The light of wholeness must come. The light of peace and prosperity, the light of divine right action in your life, the light of all good things unfolding for you. It must come because you have said yes to something deep within inside of you that is inevitable because it is of God. You see, the scripture stories are written in such a way as to reveal this kind of co-optive narrative. It's a message and it's a warning to the powers that be at the time, right? You can see these kind of through a Hollywood lens, if you will, right? A long, long time ago in a galaxy, Galilee, far, far away, right? This conspiracy seed was, this plot was planted, set on upsetting the ruling class elite from their positions of power and control and returning peace and justice for all. But those that were in power would fight back. They would seek out the focal point of this insurgence and seek to snuff it out. They would make an example of this light bringer in hopes that they would squash the rebel cause, right? You see the Hollywood narrative that is right there in the scriptures. He came in the midst of conflict and poverty. He was rejected before he was even born. He was born in a feed trough. He was hunted down and grew up in obscurity. And yet through all of this, he delivers a message that cannot be put out by even his own death, because his message is the light lives in you. The light lives in you. It is in your consciousness. It is in your awareness. It is in your capacity to wake up. I believe, actually, that the original authors of the gospel stories were far more New Thought oriented than you and I have ever been taught. I believe that they're actually telling us in the traditional way in which the story is written that the message is not about the uniqueness of the man Jesus. The message is about the light that lives inside of us. It's a hidden code that says the resurgence and the insurrection lives inside of us, and that we have the capacity to illuminate a world of justice and peace for everyone. But we first have to believe it. We first have to see it with our inner eyes, and we have to be willing to be it. We have to be willing to step into it. You see, you cannot snuff out your truth. You cannot suppress your divinity, yours or mine. Ultimately, the integrity and wholeness of the universe cannot be violated or destroyed, and everything will return to it. But in order for this sort of operative narrative, this insurgent narrative to be successful, all of it is actually dependent on one very important thing. Those who deliver the message must be careful to care more about the mission of embodying the message than they do about the label that they are given for doing so. Let me say that again. Because you may be wondering, as I've been speaking this morning, well, gosh, if you're even half right, right, David, if you're even half right, that the gospel writers are more New Thought than we've ever been taught, well, then why doesn't that come through in evangelical Christianity or traditional Christianity or in the tradition that you were raised in or whatever it might be? And this is the answer to that question. Those responsible for carrying out the mission must care more about the capacity to embody the message than they do about the label that they are given for doing so. If we care more about the label, Christian, saved, follower of Jesus, whatever that is, if we care more about the label than we do about the mission, then we've gotten dramatically off track. You see, that's why Paul Tillich, one of my favorite theologians, right? Paul Tillich says that Christianity is not about Christianity. Whew. Right? Christianity is not about Christianity. That's a German-trained Lutheran theologian who said that. Not a New Thought author, not Ernest Holmes, not anybody else. Paul Tillich. Christianity is not about Christianity. And he says the moment that it becomes about the label, the moment it becomes about the creed or the book or the symbol or anything else, then it has gotten off track and it has forgotten its core message. He says Christianity ultimately can only be about one thing, which is the new being, the new way of being in the world. You see? Once we know that we are the bearers of the light in the world, carrying into the world through our consciousness a light of peace, justice, and wholeness, we know that we must be willing to examine our own consciousness, our own contributions, and to lift up everyone and everything into a light of justice that moves through our hands. It moves through the policies, and this is why I have a slight irritation when somebody says I'm too political in my message, because I've got news for you. Everything is political, right? Because politics is just how we carry out. It's how we structure in the physical realm the consciousness that we are carrying. I care more about consciousness than I do about political positions, but political positions and political structures are the way in which consciousness gets carried out. Ooh, hear me. Consciousness is the way in which, politics are the way in which the consciousness gets carried out. And the consciousness has got to be one anchored in light and love and wholeness. First, that you anchor into your own divinity. And then you know that which you're anchoring into, you are not separate from anyone or anything. And therefore, the light and wholeness and love and beauty and truth and well-being that you feel for yourself must be the divine birthright of every living soul. Now, how do you make that real? You got to make it real through policy. You got to make it real through structure. You got to make it real through schools and education and the ways in which we move and act and be together. And that inevitably is going to lead you to intersections that have political implications. That's not bad. That's not wrong. That's not being spiritual enough. That's actually anchoring in spiritual truth and then being willing to follow through. That's a whole nother sermon. I didn't mean to go there. I apologize. Here's the deal, right? When we know that we are the bearers of light, we carry into the world through our consciousness. We come to a peace that passes all understanding because we understand that we are that light. And nobody can take it away from you. Nobody can take this light away from you. But it is up to you to carry it into the world. I'm going to close this morning with a poem from Howard Thurman. Howard Thurman, who inspired Martin Luther King Jr. as one of his mentors, and who for most of his career, Howard Thurman, as a theologian and Christian scholar, was rejected by mainstream Christianity, very much embraced by New Thought, and has had a resurgence in many years to an elevated status of sainthood, right? Being a tremendous luminary, mystic. Howard Thurman, beautiful poem entitled "Christmas is Waiting to be Born." Where the refugees seek deliverance that never comes, where the heart consumes itself if it would live, where little children age before their time, and life wears down the edges of our mind, where the old man sits, mind grown cold, while bones and sinew, blood and cell go slowly down to death, where fear companions each day's life, and perfect love seems long delayed. Christmas is waiting to be born in you, in me, in all mankind. Christmas is waiting to be born in you, in me, in all mankind. May we carry that light and that message into this week as we celebrate on the 21st, the solstice, as we move into Christmas Eve celebrations and the light of love and our family traditions and all of the things that we have in store. Don't forget our 7 p.m. Service, East Coast time. And then into Kwanzaa, celebrating the rich cultural diversity of our community. We'll have special inspirational messages for you each day of that sacred holiday as it leads us up to the new year. I love you all. Thank you so much. Peace and blessings.